He kissed her cheek, then winked at her best friend right in front of me. At my sister's anniversary brunch, she thought she had the perfect marriage. The dream house. The golden husband. But I knew something she didn't. Something I'd kept to myself, until that morning. My name's Kara, I'm 35. And I watched my sister build her whole world around a man who couldn't even keep his hands to himself. So I told her the truth, right there, while her best friend's mimosa was still in her hand. If someone was hiding this from you, would you want to know? Or would it hurt too much? Tell me in the comments. What's worse, betrayal from a man or betrayal from your best friend? The cake said, to forever. Scrolled in gold buttercream across layers of lemon chiffon and blush fondant. It sat there on a crystal stand framed by a halo of white peonies and pale pink tulips glowing beneath a string of hanging lights. And for a moment you might believe it, that kind of forever. The kind Camille always believed in. She stood in the center of the backyard, radiant in a sleeveless lilac dress, her hair pinned in soft curls, one hand clutching a flute of peach mimosa, the other resting gently on Nathan's chest. He was smiling at her, but his eyes drifted. I caught the shift, just long enough to matter. His gaze flicked sideways toward Fiona. Fiona, with her effortless laugh and off-the-shoulder sage green gown, clinked glasses with him across the drinks table. Their shoulders had been closer than necessary when I walked in. I shouldn't have noticed. I didn't want to. But once you've been burned by that kind of closeness, you never quite forget how it smells, like citrus and smoke. Like something sweet about to turn. Juliette. Camille called, lifting her glass. You're just in time for the toast. I forced a smile and stepped forward onto the flagstone path, heels sinking slightly into the soft spring grass. The garden shimmered in early March light, too warm for the season, too perfect to trust. Savannah has that kind of weather. Just when you think winter's settled and it offers you a false spring. A weekend of sun-drenched air and blooming dogwoods that make you forget the frost ever existed. I knew better. The brunch was laid out in classic Camille fashion, round linen-draped tables, hand-lettered place cards, heirloom china from Mom's cabinet. There was a live acoustic duo playing old jazz standards in the corner, and pastel macarons stacked into a tower near the lemonade station. Camille looked like the heroine of one of her favorite romance novels. And for her 40th birthday, she wanted nothing more than this sunshine music family and a husband who made her feel adored. I wished I could have given her that. I wished I didn't feel what I felt the second I stepped through the garden gate. But Nathan's hand on Fiona's lower back said too much. And Fiona's smile, it wasn't the kind you give your best friend's husband. It lingered too long. Camille didn't notice. She was glowing. Of course she didn't notice. She had always wanted a life worth celebrating, and Nathan had always been very good at making people believe they were lucky to have him. The cake said, to forever. Scrolled in gold buttercream across layers of lemon chiffon and blush fondant. It sat there on a crystal stand framed by a halo of white peonies and pale pink tulips glowing beneath a string of hanging lights. And for a moment you might believe it, that kind of forever. The kind Camille always believed in. She stood in the center of the backyard, radiant in a sleeveless lilac dress, her hair pinned in soft curls, one hand clutching a flute of peach mimosa, the other resting gently on Nathan's chest. He was smiling at her, but his eyes drifted. I caught the shift, just long enough to matter. His gaze flicked sideways toward Fiona. Fiona, with her effortless laugh and off-the-shoulder sage green gown, clinked glasses with him across the drinks table. Their shoulders had been closer than necessary when I walked in. I shouldn't have noticed. I didn't want to. But once you've been burned by that kind of closeness, you never quite forget how it smells, like citrus and smoke, like something sweet about to turn. Juliette, Camille called, lifting her glass. You're just in time for the toast. I forced a smile and stepped forward onto the flagstone path, heels sinking slightly into the soft spring grass. The garden shimmered in early March light, too warm for the season, too perfect to trust. Savannah has that kind of weather. Just when you think winter's settled and it offers you a false spring. A weekend of sun-drenched air and blooming dogwoods that make you forget the frost ever existed. I knew better. The brunch was laid out in classic Camille fashion: round linen-draped tables, hand-lettered place cards, heirloom china from Mom's cabinet. There was a live acoustic duo playing old jazz standards in the corner, and pastel macarons stacked into a tower near the lemonade station. Camille looked like the heroine of one of her favorite romance novels. And for her 40th birthday, she wanted nothing more than this sunshine music family and a husband who made her feel adored. I wished I could have given her that. I wished I didn't feel what I felt the second I stepped through the garden gate. But Nathan's hand on Fiona's lower back said too much. And Fiona's smile, it wasn't the kind you give your best friend's husband. It lingered too long. Camille didn't notice. She was glowing. Of course she didn't notice. She had always wanted a life worth celebrating. And Nathan had always been very good at making people believe they were lucky to have him. Camille looped her arm through mine as I approached. "You smell like lavender and flight delays," she teased. I had taken the red-eye from Chicago, barely made it in time. "You know I wouldn't miss your big day," I said, brushing windblown hair from my face. "I'm glad," she said, gently squeezing my wrist. "Nathan and Fiona have done everything." I didn't lift a finger. I smiled again, tighter this time. "Fiona planned all this, every detail," Camille beamed. "She even ordered the cake from that place in Charleston I love. Isn't she incredible?" "Incredible." I bit the word back. Let it dissolve on my tongue like sugar that never quite turns to sweetness. From behind us, Fiona appeared holding a small velvet box. Her tone was light, her timing flawless. "Before the toast, one more thing." She clicked the box open and revealed a thin gold bracelet shimmering under the canopy of string lights. "Because," she said, turning to Camille, "you always shine brightest." Camille gasped softly, eyes glistening. "Fie. You didn't have to, I wanted to," Fiona replied, placing the bracelet on her wrist, her fingers lingering a second too long. I caught Nathan's face in that moment, just behind Fiona's shoulder. He wasn't looking at the bracelet, he was looking at her. And it wasn't admiration. It was hunger. A split-second flicker before he blinked and replaced it with applause. To anyone else, it would have been nothing. To me, it was everything. "Let's take a photo." Mom's voice rang out as she stepped forward in her Sunday blue dress, always ready with her phone. Camille pulled Fiona and Nathan close. "My favorites," she laughed. They posed, Camille in the middle beaming. Nathan's arm draped over her shoulder, Fiona's hand just beneath his elbow. The trio of perfection. Glossy, symmetrical, camera ready. I stood off to the side, watching. Snapped a mental picture of the scene, one I knew I'd remember even if the photo disappeared. Mom waved me over. "Jules, get in here, I'll take the next one," I said, feigning distraction as I moved toward the drinks table. Peach mimosa, chilled to perfection. I took a sip. Too sweet. I glanced back at them, still laughing, still posed, still pretending. But Nathan's smile faltered for a breath too long when Fiona touched his hand. And Fiona. She was watching me, just for a beat. Just long enough to wonder if she knew I knew. The sun was beginning to dip behind the magnolia trees, casting a golden hush over the party. Someone switched the music from jazz to soft folk. Laughter carried across the garden like floating bubbles, pretty fragile, waiting to burst. I wandered toward the back patio, mostly to breathe. Mostly to escape the slow tightening in my chest. Past the linen tables and the caterers refilling trays of goat cheese tartlets, I slipped through the French doors leading into the kitchen. No one saw me. I wasn't hiding. Not yet. The house smelled like cinnamon rolls and citrus polish, Fiona's signature blend. Her scent had become part of Camille's world. Her fingerprints, invisible, were everywhere. I was about to head upstairs to wash my face when I heard it. Low voices. Barely above a whisper. I paused near the hallway that wrapped behind the kitchen. "We can't keep sneaking like this." The sentence struck me clean across the spine. Fiona's voice. Soft, urgent. A pause. Then Nathan. "Just a little longer, I promise." Footsteps shuffled. Fabric rustled. Maybe a hand brushing skin. We have to stop, Fiona whispered. People are starting to notice. His reply came slower. Then let them. Something inside me locked up. I pressed my back against the cool plaster of the hallway wall. My breath caught. My fingers curled into fists at my sides. They didn't know I was there. And for a moment, I wasn't sure I was either. Because the words the exact same sentence I'd heard them once before. Years ago, different house, different boy. Same whisper, same heat. And Fiona had been there then too. The same game repainted with pastel colors and polite brunches. The same hunger dressed in linen and charm. I squeezed my eyes shut. I wasn't supposed to be part of this again. I had promised myself after the last time after Ryan that I'd never stand by while someone I loved walked straight into the fire. But here I was, watching the match get lit, and I wasn't sure which burned worse, the betrayal I was hearing or the memory it pulled back from the dead. I should have walked away. Right then. Right there. I should have turned around, grabbed my purse from the foyer, and vanished into the Savannah dusk. But something in me, something old and raw and unfinished, froze me to the floor. Because Fiona's voice, those same words I'd heard them 12 years ago behind the dorms at Emory, tangled in moonlight, and a boy named Ryan. I had trusted her then too. Trusted that when she said, "We're just friends," she meant it. Trusted that she wouldn't let something like that, someone like him, come between us. But 2 weeks later, he stopped calling. And 3 months after that, they showed up hand in hand at a New Year's party, smiling like they hadn't stolen anything at all. That was the first time I lost something to Fiona. I never told Camille. Never told anyone. Because who would have believed that Fiona, sweet selfless Fiona, had claws so sharp you didn't feel the cut until you bled. Now 12 years later, she'd found her next target. And Camille, she was already handing her the knife. I took a step back, careful not to creak the wood beneath my heel. Their voices had softened again, just murmurs now. The kind lovers use when they think the world's asleep. I walked back into the garden on legs I barely recognized. Camille was laughing with Mom near the rose arbor, still admiring her bracelet, still glowing like nothing had shifted. I watched her from a distance. My sister, still believing in fairy tales. And me, I was the one holding the glass slipper, cracked, bloodied, wondering how many more times we'd let Fiona try it on. It started with wine pairings. Fiona was planning a tasting for one of her clients, some vineyard launch out in Beaufort, and she'd asked to borrow my tablet just for a second. "I'm hopeless with my phone," she'd said, waving her manicured hand like a Southern belle in distress. "You know I can never get those tiny search boxes to work." I nodded, handed it to her, and didn't think about it again. Not until Sunday evening. The rain had been falling steady since noon, soft and rhythmic like fingertips drumming on velvet. My apartment smelled like chamomile and lemonwood polish. I had jazz humming low from the speaker, a Miles Davis track barely louder than the rain. It was one of those nights made for solitude. A bowl of leftover risotto, a glass of red, and plans to finally organize my Pinterest boards. I reached for my tablet. It blinked awake with the familiar home screen. And then something odd happened. A sync notification popped up. One new folder synced from Fiona's iCloud drive. I blinked. It shouldn't have done that. She must have still been logged in. Or worse, had used my device to access her own drive and never logged out. My thumb hovered for a second. Just long enough to pretend I wasn't going to open it, but I did. Because curiosity is quiet. It doesn't bang or shout, it just taps gently on your shoulder until you turn. The folder was titled Florence Sketches. I assumed it was for one of her wedding clients, a mood board of Tuscan villas or floral arches for a destination elopement. That was Fiona's brand, effortless, elegant, overpriced. She curated dreams, one cork-wrapped invitation at a time. I tapped the folder open. At first it was what I expected, photos of a sunset over terracotta rooftops, a crumbling stone villa with ivy spilling down the balcony. But then a mirror selfie. Fiona, wrapped in a hotel robe, holding a glass of red wine. And behind her, Nathan, shirtless, grinning. lying back against the pillows, hands behind his head like he had nothing in the world to hide. I blinked. The file name read, Florence_3202.jpg. But the timestamp. It was from 2 weeks ago. The same night Camille posted a picture of all of us at her place. Wine night with my people.jpg. I stared at the screen unmoving. My own reflection flickered faintly in the glass jaw, tight eyes dull. The next file loaded automatically. A video this time. Fiona's voice soft and lazy. Say it again, Nathan. You're trouble. She giggled. You love trouble. I pressed pause. But the sound echoed anyway. In the hum of the jazz. In the ticking of the wall clock. In the guilt crawling into my chest like a slow leak. I didn't press play again. Not right away, I just sat there, tablet on my lap. Glass of wine untouched. Rain tapping the window like it was trying to warn me of something. I don't know how long I stared before I tapped the next file. Maybe a minute. Maybe 5. There was a voice memo this time. I didn't mean to play it, it just started. Fiona again. This time whispering. You were so good to me this morning, she said, a teasing lilt in her voice. I can still feel your hands. Then Nathan's voice, low, lazy, too familiar. Your insatiable baby. I dropped the tablet like it burned me. It hit the couch cushion with a soft thud. But the sound kept playing. Laughter, soft kisses. The kind of intimacy you can't mistake no matter how hard you try. I fumbled to pause it, my fingers cold, clumsy. When it finally stopped, I didn't breathe for a long time. I looked out the window instead. The street lamp outside cast long lines across the sidewalk. A couple walked by under one umbrella laughing about something I couldn't hear. In another world, I could have been one of them. Instead, I was here, staring at a tablet that now felt like a loaded weapon. The next photo was the final blow. A date stamp in the corner, the 3rd of March, 9:14 p.m. 2 weeks ago. Camille had been home that night wearing her favorite mustard cardigan, passing around wine like it was communion. Best night in with my best people, she'd said, leaning against Fiona on the couch while Nathan poured another glass. I remember watching them. I remember thinking how perfect it all looked. And how something in me itched. Now I knew why. I didn't delete anything. Not the photos. Not the audio. Not even the video that made my stomach turn. I just let them sit there, like rot beneath a perfect lawn. I placed the tablet back on the coffee table, screen down, and folded my hands in my lap. My fingers wouldn't stop twitching. Camille's voice buzzed in my phone, then soft and sweet like always. A voice message. Hey Jules. Just checking in. Are we still on for our sister brunch Sunday? I made that lemon lavender loaf you love. I didn't listen to the whole thing. I didn't need to. She was excited, hopeful, clueless. I typed a reply, yes. Can't wait. Then deleted it. Typed again. Of course, I'll bring the tea. Deleted that too. My screen stayed blank, just like the space between truth and betrayal. The kind of space Fiona liked to dance in. I leaned back into the couch, closed my eyes. And in the quiet, an old memory rose up. Freshman year. Fiona in my dorm room. My boyfriend's cologne on her sweatshirt, and her saying it was a one-time thing. Don't ruin us over it. She didn't believe in consequences then. And clearly she didn't now. But maybe it wasn't about her. Maybe the real question was, would telling Camille the truth save her or destroy both of us? Everyone saw the brunch invitation and thought, this family is solid. The font was elegant. The colors soft, lilac and ivory. Camille had even sealed the envelopes with a gold wax stamp that bore the letter C, like a crest. Like legacy. But what most people forget is this. Perfection is quiet. And so is betrayal. It was Friday. 2 days before the brunch. The sun was out, lazy and golden, casting warm shadows on Camille's front porch. I stepped through her doorway with my shoes still squeaking from wet pavement. She was already lighting the second candle in the hallway. Gardenia. Always gardenia. Just in time, Camille smiled, wiping her hands on a linen towel. I made lemon bars. Want one before we start? I'm good. I offered a faint smile. Show me the list. She beamed, pulling out a folded paper with checkboxes. You're going to love this. I even made a playlist. Got Fiona to add her favorites. It's very brunch chic. She tapped her phone and the speakers in the living room played soft acoustic covers. John Mayer. Norah Jones. A version of Can't Help Falling in Love that sounded like it was recorded in someone's attic. I nodded along. Nice touch. She didn't notice my hands stiffen when I saw her wallpaper, a photo of her and Nathan in Florence. The one she'd posted last year with the caption, "Love built here." In the photo, Nathan's hand rested on her waist. But his eyes, even in pixels, looked slightly elsewhere. Camille moved with that kind of grace you can't fake. The kind that comes from believing, truly believing that your world is exactly as it should be. She hummed softly while adjusting tulips in a blue vase. There were sugar cookies cooling on a tray. The house smelled like lemon polish and vanilla pods, like someone had scrubbed and baked their way into joy. She turned toward me. You think it's too much? Fiona said the little hanging banners might be cheesy. They're fine. I glanced out the window just as a car pulled up the driveway. It was Nathan. He stepped out wearing his Friday casual light sweater, pressed jeans, brown leather shoes without a scuff. He walked in like he owned the air. Afternoon, Jules, he said, brushing a quick smile past me before walking over to Camille and kissing her temple. Too quick. My stomach did that hollow flip again. I reminded myself to breathe. You made lemon bars, Nathan noted, lifting the corner of the foil without asking. Don't eat them all now, Camille teased. They're for the brunch. They'll survive, he smirked, popping a bite into his mouth. I watched them move like choreography, familiar routine, polished. But when Camille turned away, his eyes flicked over to me. A glance too long. Not flirtatious, more like alert. We held that silence for a beat too long. The front door opened again. Fiona. Her voice preceded her, bright and sugary. Hope I'm not late to the prep party. She carried 2 bottles of rosé and a bag that said brunch is always a good idea in sparkly script. Camille rushed over to hug her. You brought the wine. Bless you. Fiona set the bottles on the counter and tossed her hair with effortless flair. It's nothing. I mean, if you're gonna turn 40, you should at least do it with good wine and better company. Nathan chuckled. Camille smiled. I just nodded. Her dress was blush pink off-shoulder soft satin. Too soft for a casual pre-brunch drop-in. She looked at me and grinned. I hope you don't mind, I stole that lemon bar recipe you shared years ago. Gonna try making them for my niece. I don't mind, I replied, folding my arms. But you always forget the salt. Her eyes narrowed briefly. Then she laughed. Guilty. Camille moved toward the dining area. Jules wanted to check the table setup. I followed. But something tugged inside me, a thread I couldn't ignore. After Camille and Fiona moved outside to check the garden setup, I lingered in the hallway. The house, usually filled with chatter and clinking glass, held a strange stillness. Like it was waiting for something. I passed the hallway mirror. Caught my own eyes. Tired, focused. Not the same girl who used to believe a lie was kinder than the truth. Camille's home office door was ajar. Just a few inches. I shouldn't have gone in. But I did. The scent hit first, gardenias from the candle she always burned while working. Then the softness of the armchair she'd thrifted in college and reupholstered herself. A framed photo on the bookshelf, the 3 of us, me, Camille, Fiona, shoulders pressed together, matching sun hats on a beach in Tybee Island. I looked at that version of us and felt nothing but distance. Her desk was spotless except for a little flash drive. Black, unlabeled. Just sitting there like a question waiting to be asked. I hesitated. Then I slid it into the USB port of Camille's sleek silver laptop. At first it seemed like nothing. Spreadsheets, menu drafts. A folder of Camille's speech notes for her work event. Then, a folder titled F, inside backups, voice memos, text archives. I clicked on one labeled Florence Itinerary. A 2-page document popped up. Elegant serif font. Hotel name at the top, Villa Romana Firenze. A reservation, confirmation. 2 guests, 1 king bed. At the bottom, Nathan's name. I stared. No breath. Just the faint tick of Camille's office clock behind me. Another file, a list of gelato shops. Another, a scan drawing Fiona's handwriting in the corner, for N. I closed my eyes. The air in the room changed. Something cold pressed against my spine. This wasn't just betrayal, this was planning. This was intimacy. This was routine. My hand hovered over the trackpad. There was a moment, just a flicker, when I imagined hitting delete. Wiping it clean. Letting Camille hold on to her illusion just a little longer. But then I saw another file name. Florence, backup. M4A. I didn't play it. I didn't need to. The silence in the room said more than any voice ever could. From the patio I heard the pop of a cork. Laughter. Fiona's voice lilting through the open French doors. Jules, come toast with us. I pulled the flash drive out gently. Left it exactly where I found it. Closed the laptop. Took one last look at the framed photo on the shelf. The 3 of us, arms around each other like we were made of permanence. Then I smoothed my blouse, fixed my face in the mirror, and stepped out into the light. Fiona had her arm wrapped around Camille's shoulder, holding a flute of champagne with the other. Nathan stood beside them, smiling too perfectly at something Camille had just said. I raised my glass when they handed me one. Met Fiona's eyes. She winked. I smiled. But it wasn't the kind of smile that softened, it was the kind that sharpened. The kind you give right before a match is lit. The bubbles danced in my glass, bright and fleeting, and I thought, tomorrow no one will be smiling like this. The garden smelled like ripe peaches and polished silver. I arrived early, too early. Camille's voice had been bright on the phone that morning. She'd asked if I could come help with setup, and I said yes before my better judgment could interrupt. There were folding chairs to arrange, napkins to fan, peach bellinis to chill, all mindless tasks. And still my hands trembled when I laid the dessert forks down. Each clink felt louder than it should. Camille floated past me in a pastel blue dress, her hair pinned in soft waves, cheeks already glowing before a single sip of champagne. She was always early for joy. Jules, did the jazz trio arrive? She asked, barely glancing up as she tied ribbons around the floral centerpieces. They're tuning up under the pergola, I answered. She smiled. Perfect. But nothing felt perfect anymore. By 10:30 the garden had begun to fill. Our aunts in their Sunday florals, neighbors from the cul-de-sac carrying baby gifts they'd pretend were birthday appropriate. Laughter bubbled under the white tent like champagne, and all I could think about was that voice memo still saved on my phone. Fiona showed up late as always. She swept in like the breeze had been waiting for her. Her hair was blown out, lips painted soft coral, arms wide open as she greeted everyone like a returning queen. And then Nathan. He was standing by the drink table. As soon as he saw her, his hand twitched. He lifted a bottle and poured her mimosa without her asking. Their eyes locked for a second too long. I watched, I counted. And then I looked away. My mother found me by the hydrangeas, adjusting the sound system. Are you all right, sweet pea? You look pale. I'm just hot, I lied. She reached out, brushing something from my shoulder. You girls. You make me proud. Today's a celebration. She walked off, humming. It was almost time. I turned the volume knob down and waited. Camille clinked her glass gently with the silver cake knife. Everyone, if I could just have a moment. The crowd hushed. The jazz trio quieted to a hum. She stood beneath the white trellis wrapped in roses, sunlight catching the blush on her cheeks. I just want to say, thank you. She began, her voice clear and warm. 40 has never looked so full. I have family, I have love, and I have the kind of friends who show up early with flowers and leave late with leftovers. Laughter rippled softly through the crowd. Camille turned toward Fiona. And Fiona, my rock through college, my other half when I needed one. You remind me what grace looks like. Fiona gave a performative little bow drawing chuckles. Then Camille looked at me. And my sister Juliette. She never asks for the spotlight, but she's the one who holds the roof up when the storm comes. I love you. My throat clenched. I didn't smile. Instead, I stood. Champagne flute in one hand. Phone in the other. Camille blinked surprised. Jules, I stepped forward, not toward the trellis but toward the little speaker table beside the cake. I have something to say too, I said quietly. There was a beat of polite silence. I'll keep it short, I just want you to hear something. I unlocked my phone. Pressed play. The speaker crackled for a breath, then Fiona's voice, unmistakably breathless, filled the air. Last night was fast. Next time let's not rush. Laughter. Nathan's voice low and intimate. Then book 2 nights, baby. A fork dropped. Someone gasped. I didn't look at the guests. I looked at Camille. Her smile faltered. Eyes frozen. Mimosa glass trembling just slightly in her fingers. I let the audio play 5 more seconds, then stopped it. Silence. A long, hollow silence. Then, a single bird call. Like nature itself was trying to distract the room. Camille didn't say a word at first. She just stared at the speaker like it had spit venom. Then her eyes slid over to Nathan. He looked down. Didn't move. Didn't deny. And finally, slowly, her gaze turned to Fiona. Fiona's face was a mask of frozen nerves, eyes wide. Lips parted, but no sound came out. The entire garden had gone still. A jazz musician softly lowered his trumpet. Camille took one breath. Then another. She placed her mimosa down on the dessert table. Walked across the patio with the precision of someone not wanting to trip over her own shock. Her heels clicked against the pavers. She stopped in front of Nathan, held out her wrist. Unclipped the delicate bracelet he'd given her that morning, gold with a tiny engraved charm. She pressed it into his palm. And in a voice that didn't crack, didn't rise, just existed, she said. Don't lose it. You'll need something to pawn when you move out. A few murmurs stirred in the crowd. Camille turned to Fiona. That same voice, calm, cold, not hers, and yet exactly. Hers delivered the line I would remember forever. That toast earlier. It was beautiful. I just didn't know it had been rehearsed in a hotel room. Fiona flinched. Camille didn't. She turned. Walked back toward the house. The breeze picked up just enough to flutter her dress. Not a single person followed her. She didn't slam the door. She didn't cry. She disappeared inside with the silence of someone who'd just realized the shape of their life had changed and chose not to collapse. The guests stood stunned. Even the champagne bubbles seemed to slow. Fiona reached for her clutch with trembling hands. I didn't. This wasn't. Her voice faltered. Nathan stepped forward, not toward Camille but toward his car keys resting on the garden bench. He grabbed them like a lifeline. Didn't look at anyone, didn't say a word. He was gone before anyone thought to stop him. Fiona turned in circles, searching for someone to anchor to. No one moved. The guests, once chatty and flushed with Prosecco, had become statues. Only a whisper of wind. A napkin drifted across the lawn. Finally, Fiona's voice cracked. She's blowing this out of proportion. You don't understand. My mother's expression, tight-lipped, jaw clenched, said otherwise. And then a woman I barely knew, friend of a friend, maybe, looked at me and said quietly, "You didn't have to do it like that." I turned toward her. Met her eyes with mine. And I answered even softer, "Number, I didn't. But someone had to." Fiona left not long after. She didn't say goodbye. The jazz trio quietly packed up. The guests filtered out in murmurs and half apologies. No one asked for cake, no one touched the second bottle of champagne. I stood beneath the trellis Camille had once tied fairy lights to and watched as the sun shifted low behind the trees. Everything looked the same, but nothing felt like it had been before. That's the thing about betrayal. It doesn't shout, it lingers. Softly. Like the scent of roses when the party's over. Everyone left the brunch with full bellies and empty illusions. Plates cleared, champagne corks discarded. Smiles packed away like centerpieces only used for special occasions, but I didn't go home full. I left with my hands trembling on the steering wheel, gripping 10 and 2 like I was bracing for a storm. And in a way I was. Camille hadn't said a word after she walked inside. Not a text. Not a glance from the upstairs window. Just absence. The rain started 15 minutes into the drive. Soft at first, like forgiveness might be possible, then harder, colder, more honest. I parked in front of my building and sat there, engine off, listening to the ticking sound it made as it cooled. The quiet in my apartment was a different kind of loud, the kind that wraps around your ribs and tightens. I set my purse on the table, took off my shoes like it mattered. Then I just stood in the kitchen. There was leftover Thai on the counter from the night before, green curry and jasmine rice. I didn't touch it. I poured a glass of water. Didn't drink it. I turned on the television, muted it. I just sat. Back straight, hands still shaking. For a second, I almost opened the old book I kept on the coffee table, Flannery O'Connor short stories, but my eyes wouldn't settle. Then my phone buzzed. Mom. 4:12 p.m. I stared at the screen before answering. She didn't wait for a hello. She's not talking to anyone, my mother said softly. Not me, not Fiona. Not even Aunt Margot, and you know Camille never misses a check-in. Her voice wasn't angry, just tired. I don't know what to say, Mom, I replied, barely above a whisper. There was a pause on the line. Then, you meant well. I know you did, but meaning well doesn't always mean it won't hurt like hell. I nodded. Not that she could see it. She needs time, Mom added. And then, like she couldn't help herself. You could have warned her, Juliette. Privately. I closed my eyes. Said nothing. Because we'd both thought of that already. We said our goodbyes like strangers. Careful. Formal. I hung up. Turned the phone face down, and waited for the guilt to turn into something else. The rain hadn't stopped. It tapped the windows in a steady rhythm, like fingers drumming a truth I didn't want to face. I wrapped myself in the throw blanket from the couch, more out of habit than comfort. My apartment felt colder than usual. Or maybe I was just thinner from the inside now. I picked up my phone again. New notification. Fiona. 5:07 p.m. Are you happy now? You ruined me. No hi. No apology. Just venom dressed like victimhood. I stared at the screen, thumb hovering. Then I hit delete. Not block. Not reply. Just gone. Because some things didn't need energy anymore. I set the phone down again and leaned back. It felt like I had been holding my breath for days. No Camille. No resolution. Just echoes. I stood and walked over to the bookshelf. Not for a book. Just moving. Some people clean when they're spiraling. I rearranged dust jackets. That's when I saw it. Tucked between an old photo album and a stack of cookbooks I never used. A small wooden frame with a photo I hadn't looked at in years. Me and Camille. Aged 10 and 12. She was behind me on the bike, arms stretched wide like she was flying, and I, nervous little thing, was clutching the handlebars with a grimace. But if you looked closely, her hand was wrapped lightly around the back of my seat, keeping me steady. That summer she'd taught me how to ride. Told me not to look down, said I've got you. I sank to the floor, the frame in my lap, and let the memory press into my chest. I'd always thought Camille was the fragile one. The romantic. The dreamer. The one who believed in promises. But the truth. She'd held so many people up for so long, and I had just let her fall. Night settled in without ceremony, no calls. No footsteps in the hallway. Just the rain still falling and the silence that had thickened into something heavier than grief. I changed into pajamas I didn't remember picking. Poured another glass of water. Still didn't drink it. My phone lit up once, twice, news alerts, a spam text, another message from Fiona. I didn't open. Let them rot in the inbox. I didn't have room for any more poison tonight. Instead, I pulled my cardigan tighter and turned off the living room light. The apartment dimmed around me, warm and soft like a place that knew I needed quiet. That's when it came. A chime. The voicemail icon blinking. I reached for it like it might burn me. One new voicemail. From Camille. I sat back down on the couch before pressing play. Her voice came through like breath over glass. "I'm not ready to talk," she began. "Not angry, not broken, just tired. But I needed you to know I'm alive. And I saw it in your eyes. You didn't do it out of spite." A pause. I could hear her swallow. "You didn't do it to hurt me, but that doesn't mean it didn't." Another breath. "That's all I can say for now." Click. I let the silence that followed ring longer than the message itself. My throat tightened. Not from guilt, but from the ache of knowing the truth hadn't saved her. It had only cracked everything open. Like striking a match to find someone in the dark, only to burn the map you needed to get home. I stayed on the couch for a long time after her voice faded. Not crying, not moving. Just there. Floating in that strange space between knowing I'd done the right thing and wishing I hadn't needed to. The kind of pain that doesn't have volume, only weight. I picked up my phone again. Opened the message thread with Camille. Her name looked different now. Like a person I'd known in a past life. I typed, "I'm here. However you need me." 5 words. Simple. True. My finger hovered over send. But something held me back. Not fear, not shame. Just a quiet understanding. Sometimes love means giving someone time. Space. A safe silence to scream into without echo. So I didn't send it. I locked the screen, set the phone down, and turned toward the kitchen. On the fridge, an old magnet held up a fading photo. Us again, me and Camille, arms around each other at the beach, laughing so hard our eyes disappeared. We couldn't have been more than 20. That day she told me, "If everything falls apart, we'll still have this. Us." Now the us looked different. Not broken, just bruised. But still there. I brushed my hand against the frame. And for the first time that night I exhaled. Not because it didn't hurt, but because I knew, even when everything burns down, if there's something worth rebuilding, you wait for the smoke to clear. Then you pick up the first brick. Before the toast, before the lies. There was once a dorm room with too many secrets and not enough drawers to hide them in. Fall semester 2005. Wellington Hall smelled like nail polish remover, ramen, and ambition. I was 19. Camille had just turned 21, a senior with a double major in psychology and PR. She already had her post-grad job lined up and a planner full of color-coded goals. And Fiona was the transfer. She showed up 2 weeks into the semester with a duffel bag, a rolling suitcase, and a story about how her last college just wasn't a fit. Camille offered her the empty bunk in our triple. I offered her my leftover shampoo. Fiona made an impression immediately. She wore perfume to class, clipped her syllabi into custom folders, flirted with professors but never crossed the line. She knew how to skate the edges of charm and chaos just enough to stay interesting. And I, Juliette, was the quiet one. The listener. The one who remembered your coffee order but never interrupted your breakdown. Camille once called me the glue. But even glue can get brittle if stretched too thin. It started small. Fiona borrowing Camille's earrings. Fiona staying out all night and coming back with stories about rooftops and jazz, and, trust me, nothing happened. Fiona kissing that boy Camille liked at a Halloween party by accident, she said, wearing someone else's lipstick. I remember the night I heard Camille crying in the bathroom, door closed, water running loud. I knocked. She didn't answer. Fiona walked in an hour later holding a slice of pizza and humming. "What's up with her?" she asked. And I said nothing. Because that's what I did back then. I held secrets. I held peace. But I didn't hold Fiona accountable. One afternoon I walked back to the dorm early and found them, Fiona and my then boyfriend Ben, laughing on my bed. Too close. Her legs crossed like she owned the space. Ben jumped up. She didn't. She looked at me, tilted her head, and said, "He told me you were getting distant." I didn't cry, didn't scream. I packed my books and walked out, left my scarf, my records, my sense of safety. Camille ran after me on the quad. She called my name, grabbed my arm. "Wait," she said. I didn't know. I swear I didn't know. And I believed her. Because Camille never lied. Not back then. But she didn't stop Fiona either. She didn't ask her to leave. We stayed friends, the three of us, because that's what girls do when they think survival means pretending the fracture wasn't fatal. We survived finals. Graduation. Camille moved to Savannah. I stayed close by. Fiona floated. Years passed. Camille called me when she got engaged. To Nathan, she said breathlessly, "He's kind, Jules. The kind you don't think still exists." I almost believed her. And when she asked Fiona to be her maid of honor, I didn't flinch. Because I'd learned how to be still. How to survive inside silence. Until the day I saw Nathan touch Fiona's shoulder and laugh like I wasn't supposed to notice. Some betrayals don't shout. They unfold quietly like petals in reverse. 2 years before the brunch. I hadn't spoken to Fiona in almost 6 months. We drifted naturally, or maybe I just stopped reaching back. Then one Saturday, Camille called. "Fiona's in town," she said, cheerful. "We're meeting for coffee, come." I said no. But I didn't say why. Camille never asked. That was her gift and her flaw. She assumed the best until the truth wore a name tag and knocked on her front door. A month later, Fiona texted me. A photo. Camille and Nathan at a winery. Fiona in the background holding a glass. Caption, "Your sister glows when she's happy, huh?" I didn't reply, but I saved the photo. I don't know why. Maybe a part of me was collecting clues. Or maybe I wanted to be wrong again. There's a kind of loneliness that comes from watching the same storm form twice and realizing the first time you were the only one who saw the clouds. One afternoon, Camille invited me over. Fiona was already there. They were painting swatches in the hallway, talking about table settings and playlist themes. Fiona looked up at me and smiled. Not a guilty smile. A practiced one. The kind you use on strangers, you hope never ask questions. "Still quiet as ever, Jules," she said, brushing her fingers through her bangs. "Some things never change." "No," I said softly, "some just come full circle." Camille didn't hear. Or maybe she did and chose not to ask. That night, I sat in my apartment scrolling through old college photos. Camille in a cap and gown holding Fiona's hand. Me half smiling on the edge of the frame. I was always on the edge, wasn't I, until that brunch? Until that moment with the portable speaker and Fiona's voice echoing through the garden. I didn't expose them because I wanted revenge. I exposed them because I'd once stayed silent and watched someone I loved fall apart without ever knowing why. This time, Camille would know. This time, I wouldn't protect the wrong person again. Because the first fracture wasn't Fiona's kiss. It wasn't Ben. It wasn't even the day I walked out of that dorm room. It was the moment I stopped believing my voice could matter. And this whole story, it's me remembering that it does. 3 weeks had passed. The rain had stopped somewhere in the middle of that silence. The trees outside my window had grown fuller, like they'd been quietly cheering me on. And I had started drinking coffee again, black, no sugar, stronger. I didn't think I was waiting for anything anymore. And then the postcard came. Wedged between a credit union letter and a Thai takeout menu. No return address. No handwriting I recognized. Just a watercolor wave, soft blues bleeding into seafoam green, like someone had caught the ocean mid-breath. I turned it over. Inside, in the center of the page, a single word was written clear: "No love, Camille." No explanation. No punctuation. Just clear. My fingers brushed the edge of the card. It was slightly warped, like maybe it had gotten damp before landing in my hands. I read the word again. Not out loud, just enough to feel it settle. Clear. It didn't say forgive me, it didn't say thank you. But it felt like something had shifted. Like a tide going out. I stood up and crossed the room. Pinned the card above my corkboard next to a Polaroid of a patio. I loved a torn magazine page of sheer curtains and a swatch of linen the color of stone. Then I sat back down, let my hand hover over the edge of my coffee mug, and closed my eyes. Not to cry, not to think, just to breathe. The kind of breath you take after holding too much in. And the word clear echoed again. Not an answer, not a goodbye, just a knowing. Camille once told me years ago. The ocean always made her feel like she could breathe again. Maybe this time, she meant it. The studio had started to smell like rosemary. I kept forgetting how fast herbs took to sunlight, how much life could grow just from being given space. There was a small lemon balm pot on the windowsill now. I hadn't planted it for any reason. Just wanted something that didn't need me too much. The morning drifted by in warm silence. No beeps, no drama. Just the soft rasp of my pencil against tracing paper and the low hush of jazz filtering through the speaker I'd tucked behind the shelves. And then came the familiar knock, 2 soft taps, 1 pause, then a third. Eric. He didn't wait for an answer. Just opened the door like he had every right, holding 2 coffees with that same crooked grin. Still almond milk, no foam, he asked. I smirked. You offering me options now? He handed me the cup without a word. Just a little head tilt, eyes scanning the space like it had grown since he last saw it. I like it here, he said, setting his drink on the counter. It feels like you. I didn't say anything. Just let the steam from the coffee kiss my face. He looked at the corkboard, his gaze landing on the watercolor wave. Camille, I nodded. She okay, she's quiet, I said after a long pause. But clear. He took a slow sip, letting that word rest between us. Clear. Sometimes you don't need more than that. You know, he said, I used to think closure meant slamming the door, tying it off with a bow. And now I asked. Now he said, I think maybe. It's just knowing you didn't look away. That sat in the room for a while. Not heavy, just honest. I thought about the night after the brunch, how I'd stared at my phone waiting for Camille to say something. Anything. And how 3 weeks later all she'd sent was 1 word. But somehow it was enough. Not because it fixed anything, but because it meant she saw me. She knew. I smiled at Eric. I think you're right. He shrugged. It happens. Once every few years. We laughed gently. No undertones, no expectations. Just 2 people in the same chapter, without needing to write a sequel. That afternoon after Eric left, I sat by the window and watched the light stretch across the hardwood. The studio felt fuller now, not crowded, just lived in. Like the quiet had purpose. I opened my sketchbook and flipped through old pages. Florence rooftops. A chapel dome. A pair of entwined hands I never finished drawing. I stopped on a blank page and wrote a single word in the corner: witness. Not justice. Not revenge. Just witness. Maybe that's what it had all come down to, not fixing it. Not saving Camille from her heartbreak. Just standing still long enough to hold up a mirror and say, this is real. This happened. You deserve to know. I thought of that brunch, how her bracelet caught the light, how Fiona's hand trembled just slightly when Camille stepped back. How no one screamed. How the world kept moving. Because sometimes truth isn't a grenade. It's a whisper in a crowded room. And sometimes it's enough. I reached for my phone. Not to scroll, just to look. There was a photo still in my favorites. Me and Camille on a bike, maybe 10 or 11. Her in front, pigtails flying. Me behind, hands clenched on the seat. She held the handlebars. But it was her hands stretched behind holding mine steady that kept us upright. I smiled. Time's funny like that. You think you're the one holding on. But sometimes you are the one being carried all along. And now maybe it was my turn. Not to carry her. But to let go and trust she knew how to balance without me. I stood up, stretched, and grabbed my camera. Not the phone. The real one. The one I used when moments felt like they needed weight, and then I walked toward the waterfront. Just before sunset. Just when the wind starts to hum across the bay. The waterfront was quieter than usual. A few runners passed by, earbuds in. A golden retriever chased a paper cup near the rocks, and the waves rolled in lazy, unapologetic, endless. I walked down the boardwalk past the old benches Camille and I used to sit on after high school. Back then we used to dream here. About Paris, about love, about everything that hadn't gone wrong yet. Now, it wasn't dreams I came to chase. It was stillness. I sat on the third bench from the end. The one that always caught the last slice of sun before it dipped. I pulled out my camera, framed the waves. Snapped a photo just as a gull sliced through the horizon. It wasn't art, but it was real. I uploaded it right there using the hotspot from my phone. Captioned it with just 2 words. Let it be. I didn't wait for likes. Didn't check who viewed it, I just breathed. The wind picked up and tugged strands of hair across my cheek. And for the first time in weeks, no months, I didn't pull them back. I let them dance. Because freedom wasn't loud. It wasn't triumphant music or dramatic exits. It was this, a bench by the sea. A quiet photo. A message from your sister, no return address. And knowing you told the truth, not for revenge, not for pity, but because someone had to. Because she deserved better, and so did you. And now you sit with the ache not as punishment but as proof you were brave. I looked out at the horizon and whispered, some truths don't heal you. But they set you free. And sometimes. I smiled. That's enough. Closure isn't always a conversation. Sometimes it's just staying long enough to let the silence mean something. It was the last Saturday of May when I saw her again. Not in a therapist's office, not at a family gathering, not on some planned ceremonious walk of forgiveness. I saw Camille at the corner of Broughton and Price where the old secondhand bookstore still stood. Its striped green awning was sun-bleached now, and the bell above the door jingled just as softly as it had 20 years ago. I'd stopped in to look for a poetry book Mom once read to us when we were little. Camille had loved the part about dandelion wishes, and there she was. In the far aisle, her head tilted toward the spine of a hardcover. She hadn't seen me yet. Her hair was longer than before. She wore no makeup, just a linen blouse and soft jeans, like she'd finally peeled off all the layers people expected her to wear. For a moment, I considered walking away. Quietly. Letting her have this one soft corner of the world, but then she turned. Her eyes widened, not in panic, not in anger, just surprise. We stood like that across a shelf of cookbooks until she spoke first. You're not here for me, she said gently. No, I answered. But I don't mind being here now. Camille walked around the end of the shelf, one hand grazing the covers. She stopped a few feet away. Do you remember, she asked, how we used to hide between the travel guides and read the sad parts of novels? I smiled. Because the endings always made you cry. She gave a light laugh. They still do. We didn't mention Fiona. Or Nathan. Or voice massages. Or the fact that a whole life had cracked open beneath our feet 6 weeks ago and neither of us had tried to call since. Instead, we sat at the tiny cafe table in the back of the store. The same one where we used to split blueberry muffins and debate which city we'd live in one day. Paris. For her, Seattle. For me. She stirred her tea. I sipped mine. And then finally, she said, I'm not angry at you anymore. I didn't say thank you. It didn't feel like a gift. I wasn't sure you would be, I said. Camille nodded. I thought I'd feel lighter once everything was out, but it's strange. Sometimes you miss the weight even if it was crushing you. I didn't have an answer for that. I just let the silence hold space for her words. After a pause, she reached into her tote and pulled out a worn folded envelope. Inside was a photo of us on the front porch of our childhood home. I was maybe 8. She, 10. Camille had her arm around me, grinning wildly. I was holding an ice pop, trying not to smile, with blue lips. She placed it on the table. "I kept this one," she said. "Even when I threw the others away." My throat tightened. "Camille," I started. But she shook her head. "I don't need an apology," she said. "You did what I couldn't. You pulled the fire alarm while I was still pretending there wasn't smoke." I looked down at the picture again. "I still don't know if it saved anything." "It saved me," she said softly. Outside, the sky had shifted. The sun poked through a thick gray cloud like it had been trying to find us. Camille stood first. "I'm heading out of town," she said. "For a while, no return date." Where, I asked. She smiled, not answering. "Just somewhere clear." I reached for the photo, but she stopped me. "That's yours now," she said. "To remind you that we were always more than how it ended." She walked out the door, the bell jingling faintly. I sat there a while longer, watching the dust settle in the sunlight, listening to nothing but the hum of ceiling fans and old pages. We didn't hug, we didn't make promises. But somehow I felt like we'd both taken a breath we'd been holding for too long, and this time, we let it go. The sun slid through the tall windows of my studio, soft and amber, like butter melting across pale linen. It had been almost 2 months since the brunch. Since the voices stopped echoing and people stopped asking how Camille was doing. No one really wanted the answer. I watered the basil by the window. It had started to sprout new leaves. Funny how something can keep growing, even in the quiet. My desk was clean as always. Sketchpads stacked to the left, mood boards clipped to the right. And in the center, a small silver frame. It wasn't new. Wasn't even mine. It used to sit on Camille's bookshelf when we were kids, tucked between fairy tale paperbacks and her old French dictionary. In the photo, we were both 10. Wearing matching overalls and crooked pigtails. She had her hand on my back, steadying me on the bike. I'd stolen it from her house the day after the brunch. No one stopped me, no one noticed. She wasn't there anyway. I didn't take it to be cruel. I took it because I needed proof. Proof that we had once belonged to something soft. Something whole. The kind of love that didn't need explaining. A soft knock at the studio door pulled me from the haze. It creaked open. Eric stepped in, holding 2 cups from the cafe downstairs. "You still take oat milk?" he asked, already knowing the answer. I smiled. "Always." He handed me the cup and looked around. "It smells like lavender and graphite in here." I laughed, really laughed, for the first time in days. "It's the scent of healing, apparently." Eric didn't press. He never did. He just leaned against the doorframe and sipped his coffee like he had all the time in the world. "Camille sent me something," I said quietly. His eyebrows lifted slightly, but he didn't interrupt. "A watercolor postcard," I continued. "No return address. Just one word inside." "Let me guess," he said. "Clear." I nodded. "She always liked ocean metaphors," he said. We stood in the silence for a moment, letting the air say more than words. Finally, I added, "I used to think that clarity came when everything made sense. But now, I think it just means you stop needing it to." He nodded. "Sometimes we don't get peace from answers. We get it from choosing to stop asking." After he left, I sat at the desk again. The light had shifted cooler now, and the frame caught the last streak of gold. I picked it up, traced Camille's tiny hand in the photo, the way her fingers curved protectively around my shoulder. And I remembered something. That day, right after the photo, I'd fallen off the bike. Scraped my knee so badly it bled through my socks. But Camille didn't laugh, didn't say "I told you so." She just knelt next to me, pulled a sticker from her pocket, and pressed it to my palm. It had a cartoon Band-Aid on it, and a glittery caption that said, "You're braver than this." That sticker stayed on my sketchpad cover for years. Now I pressed the frame back to the desk. Smoothed the corner of the linen matting. I didn't know where Camille was. Didn't know if she'd call again. Didn't know if we'd ever go back to wine nights or matching pajamas on Christmas Eve. But I did know this. Some things aren't meant to go back. They're meant to be remembered, revered, and then released. Before I turned off the lights, I picked up my phone, opened the photo app, scrolled past beach shots, sketches, screenshots of restaurant menus I'd never cook. Then I stopped. One image. The postcard. I opened it. Read the word again. Clear. And whispered to the room. To be clear, I don't regret it. Not the reveal. Not the silence. Not the tears. Because sometimes telling the truth doesn't fix what's broken. But it keeps you from breaking too. I set the phone down, slipped my shoes off, and walked barefoot to the studio's front window. Outside the city was glowing. Not with noise, but with stillness. And in that stillness I felt it. The weight leave my shoulders, the breath I hadn't realized I was holding finally leave my chest. And I smiled. Not because everything was okay, but because I finally was. Some truths don't heal you, but they set you free, and sometimes that's enough. There was something quiet about the way the ocean moved that day, like it understood what couldn't be said between sisters. Some truths, when spoken out loud, don't heal things immediately, but they open a door for something honest to begin. In this life, we often think protecting someone means keeping their world intact. But sometimes real love means helping them see what's broken and trusting that they'll find the courage to rebuild. Because silence can comfort, but truth when told with care can set someone free. If this story stirred something in you, a memory, a moment of reckoning, feel free to share it below. I'll be here, listening quietly.